Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start our second unit, which entails biochemistry. So this video is going to introduce you to some key concepts related to biochemistry. Now, if you remember, bio means life and chemistry refers to chemicals. So our big focus here is really on the chemistry of life. That is, when we look at the chemicals that make up our bodies and the bodies of all things that are living, how do those chemical reactions take place? What are some important molecules that are inside of our bodies that are required for us to live? We'll also take a look at the importance of water inside of our bodies and look at the importance of different atoms, molecules, and how they chemically bond. So hopefully by the end of this video, you should be able to understand the composition of matter, describe how atoms form bonds to make compounds, and differentiate between some basic compounds of life. Just taking a look at some of our key vocabulary, you see we have quite an extensive amount of vocabulary for this particular video. Now, many of these you may already be familiar with, but we'll go through these to make sure you are 100% ready to go on these vocab terms. So all things in the universe are made up of matter. The desk is made of matter, the laptop is made of matter, even air is made of matter. Air is composed of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, some argon. So yes, even air is made of matter. And matter is made up of atoms. Atoms are considered the smallest unit of matter. And a particular type of atom is known as an element. So there's a difference between silver atoms and gold atoms. And we'll look at what makes those differences here in just a minute. But keep in mind that everything in the universe is made up of matter. And that's made up of small individual atoms, and atoms of the same type make up an element. Now we can break an atom down even further into subatomic particles, the root sub meaning below. Atoms are made up of protons, which have a positive charge, neutrons, which do not have a charge, and electrons, which have a negative charge. This reminds me of a really funny joke. A neutron walks into a bar and asks the bartender for a drink, and the bartender gives him a drink, and then he goes to pay, and the bartender says, "Oh, for you, no charge." Oh, I'm so lonely. The nucleus is the central part of the atom, and that's made up of protons and neutrons. And you notice that electrons exist on the outside of the nucleus. Now, this representation of an atom that you see here on the right isn't 100% accurate, and you'll learn more about that when we get into your chemistry class if you decide to take that later on. But keep in mind that atoms are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The nucleus is the central part of the atom, made up of protons and neutrons, and the electrons exist on the outside. So the number of protons determines the element. So if I have 6 protons, I would be a carbon atom. If I take a look at a periodic table, you'll notice that carbon is the number 6 on that periodic table. The number corresponds to the number of protons that that element has. So for example, carbon has 6 protons, nitrogen has 7 protons, oxygen has 8, fluorine has 9, and so on. Now, atoms that are considered neutral would have the same number of protons and electrons, and that makes sense because protons are positively charged and electrons are negative. So if an atom is neutral, it would have the same number of positive and negative charges. Now there's a new term here called an ion, and ions differ in the number of electrons. So for example, if we were a carbon atom that had 6 protons and 7 electrons, then it would be considered an ion because it has one more negative charge than positive charge. An isotope refers to an atom that has a different number of neutrons, but keep in mind, it's the same element because it has the same number of protons. So the examples here on the right, carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. Carbon-12 has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Carbon-13 has 6 protons and 7 neutrons, right? The number of protons stays the same, therefore it is the same element. It's still carbon. It's just a different isotope of the form carbon. And then you also see that with carbon-14, which has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. So when we differ in the number of neutrons, that's known as an isotope. But keep in mind, it's the same chemical element. All 3 of those are carbon. So in order to make compounds, chemicals have to bond with one another, and electrons make chemical bonds to become more stable. There's this thing that's called the octet rule. We won't talk a whole lot about it, but basically most elements want to have 8 electrons in their outermost shell. That's when they're most stable. And so in order to get that, atoms are going to give off electrons, they'll accept electrons, they'll share electrons any way possible in order to satisfy that octet rule. And as a result, we get a variety of different chemical compounds and molecules. There are 2 different types of chemical bonds we're going to focus on in this class. The first is known as an ionic bond, and that results from the donation of electrons to create an electrical attraction between atoms. So for example here, we have lithium, which has 1 valence electron in its outer shell. Fluorine, if you count them up, has 7 in its outermost shell. Well, in order to satisfy the octet rule for fluorine, lithium can donate that electron to fluorine, and as a result that forms a chemical bond between lithium and fluorine, which results in a compound known as lithium fluoride. So those are chemically bonded together due to the fact that the lithium ionically bonded with the fluorine by donating that electron. So keep in mind, ionic bonds are donation. I think I, like me, I'm taking that electron, right? Fluorine is taking that electron from lithium. So ionic bonds, I think I'm taking that electron. Covalent bonds result from the sharing of pairs of electrons. That root co means to share. Like if you're a co-president, it means that there's more than one president. You share the presidency with somebody. Covalent bonds result from the sharing of pairs of electrons. So if I take a look here, we have an oxygen atom that has 6 electrons, and each hydrogen atom has 2 electrons. So when they chemically bond, the hydrogen shares its electron with oxygen, and the oxygen shares 1 electron back with hydrogen. So you can see in the far right picture that there are 2 electrons being shared between hydrogen and oxygen. As a result, oxygen now has 8 electrons in its outermost shell and is stable. When we get 2 hydrogens and an oxygen together, that formulates a water molecule. So keep in mind the 2 different types of bonds. Ionic, I'm taking, donating. Covalent, the root co, means to share. So that's the sharing of electrons. Now when multiple atoms are bonded together covalently, that forms what's called a molecule. So for example, CO2, carbon dioxide. 2 oxygen atoms are covalently bonded to the carbon. You see water here is another example of that, H2O, ammonia, NH3, and methane, CH4. Now the subscripts determine the number of atoms that are present in that molecule. So CO2, for example, contains 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms. Now in biochemistry, we are primarily going to focus on organic molecules. And when we think of the term organic, usually we think of really expensive health foods from Whole Foods or Fresh Thyme or some other grocery store. But in biochemistry, the word organic just simply refers to a molecule that contains the element carbon. Keep in mind that carbon is the basis for all life forms. Everything that is living on Earth is considered carbon-based. And the reason carbon is so special is it has the unique ability to form up to 4 chemical bonds. And that allows for a lot of diversity in the type of bonds that it makes, and a lot of diversity in the different atoms that it can chemically bond to. So if we look here on the right, we have a variety of different organic compounds based on what the carbon has bonded to and how it's bonded. And you see you've got alcohols, aldehydes, acids, esters, ketones, amines, amides, ethers. You don't need to know these per se, but I wanted you to be able to look at and experience and see all of the different things that carbon can chemically bond to create all of these different molecules that are essential for life. So hopefully you have a little bit more of a basic idea of biochemistry and a little bit just about how chemistry works in general. Keep in mind that living things contain atoms in a variety of different elements, and that atoms form a variety of chemical bonds by either donating electrons through ionic bonding or sharing of electrons through covalent bonding. Also keep in mind that all life is carbon-based. So hopefully you have a really good understanding with this video. Hopefully you were able to meet the objectives for this video, and I hope it all made sense to you. We'll review a little bit more in class, but I hope everybody has a great day, and we will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.